All right. Well, if you want to talk about Quinyon Mitchell and somebody who knows a little something about corners, has a very good track record on cornerbacks, and maybe had a chance to, share the hallways with Quinyon Mitchell today, that would be our dear friend Fran Duffy, who joins us right now. Fran, how you doing?
Bo, Zach, I'm doing great. It's my favorite weekend of the year. You guys know that. So we are in the thick of things. Round two is underway. I'm excited.
Orange Tide. Does that preface a Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Wright pick for the Eagles in the second round here?
Well, I figured with us celebrating Zach, I had to go with the Syracuse love. So I went with the orange there.
That's beautiful. That's perfect. Fran, I know that you love Quinyon Mitchell. Tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, he's a player that I first watched back last summer. And one of the things that I loved most about Quinyon Mitchell right off the bat is you saw the height, weight, speed element. And to me, when I'm watching corners, one of the first things you're looking at and trying to determine, what level of corner is this? Is, okay, can he play man from press coverage? Can he play man from off coverage? Can he play zone from press coverage? Can he play zone from off coverage? Can he basically do everything that's required to be a top flight outside zone corner? So you do all that from a schematic standpoint, and then you say, okay, is he athletic enough to be able to hang in man? Is he competitive enough to hang in man? And can he find and play the football? And after watching Quinyon Mitchell for like 2 games, I said, yeah, like this guy checks all of the boxes. Now, the big question you had was, can he play up consistently in press man coverage? He was not asked to do that much at all at Toledo. It was under 6% of his snaps, I believe, was the final number over the course of his career, was up in press coverage. And so you go down to the Senior Bowl, and one of the first things I wanted to see, all right, Quinyon Mitchell's down here. Let's see him in press man. And he played almost entirely press coverage. All the one-on-one reps were in press coverage, and he passed that test with flying colors. Now, what's important about it is, again, because Zach just mentioned, you don't want to overweight that small sample size, right? So you're banking on the traits that he showed in college, and then you say, okay, let's transition that over. It's not about what a guy can or can't do. It's what was he asked to do or asked not to do, right? So I think when you saw everything, the whole body of work with Quinyon Mitchell in college at Toledo, and then you transition to the Senior Bowl, then you go to the combine. He runs 4.3 at 6 foot tall. To me, he just checked all the boxes along the way. He was a top 15 player for me coming into the season, and we came out of the season. He was a top 15 player for me. So very, very exciting addition, certainly, to this Eagles defense.
When you talk about the ball skills for Quinyon Mitchell, 25 pass deflections 2 years ago, 19 a year ago. It does seem kind of wild considering like he's the best player on the field in the MAC. You would imagine that teams are not throwing at him very often, and yet when they do, he's still getting his hands on the ball. Where do his ball skills rank in the pantheon of guys that you have studied?
I mean, it's certainly up there. I'm not going to say that it's the best I've ever seen, but it's certainly up there. I mean, it definitely meets the threshold of like, oh, this guy knows how to be able to finish on the football. And what I loved most about it too is that there are lots of different ways to be able to make plays on the football, and most of what he did was, think Asante Samuel sitting in, from depth, jumping routes and exploding on the football. He really trusts his speed to be able to close on the catch point and make plays on the football. That's where he did most of his work. But that said, I mean, there were examples where he had to turn and run and carry a vertical route and find the football downfield. And that's where, those are the plays that really make you kind of like sit up in your chair and say, okay, like you're cooking with gas here, because there aren't a lot of corners that have that ability at that size to be able to turn, run, and find the football down the field. And so that's what really got me excited about Quinyon, is that, again, he can play the football in a number of different ways from a number of different techniques.
I hope I'm not beating the dead horse of Quinyon Mitchell against Terrion Arnold, but I bring this up because the Eagles clearly had a choice there. So from your perspective, what is the difference between the two? What kind of, I don't want to say what sets Mitchell apart from Arnold, but why would a team have a preference with Mitchell relative to Arnold?
To me, the one big difference that, and without like looking at my notes on both guys to do a full comparison, I would say the big thing that stands out to me were Quinyon Mitchell's instincts over the course of the route. And so, one thing I love to be able to watch with corners, and again, this can be a little bit tricky because these routes are tough to find, is when they are in single coverage, one-on-one, whether it's man or cover 3 or quarters, but they're outside the numbers, they're one-on-one, and they have to face an intermediate route. So we'll say a route that breaks at a depth of between 8 and 15 yards. So you're talking your dig routes, your comebacks, your deep curls, right? So those kind of routes, do they have the ability to match that kind of a route, stay in the receiver's hip pocket at that depth? It's not just, hey, you know what, it's a quick slant and he saw it quickly and jumped it. But it's that ability when you see that dig route to be able to, as soon as the receiver is putting his foot in the ground to break inside, immediately like stick that back foot in the ground and trigger on the throw. To me, Quinyon Mitchell had that ability to stay in the hip pocket of the receiver consistently. And that was something with Arnold. And again, because he was kind of new to the position, he was a safety in high school and was still kind of making that transition to corner. He would let up a little bit more separation than you would like, despite the fact that he was a pretty good athlete, would give up more of that separation. So I would say that would probably be the biggest separating factor for me between those two guys. I think also Quinyon was just a little bit better at finding the football down the field. Now, I know that the production was really there for Arnold this year, and obviously that was a big reason why he ended up going in the first round. And I do think he's a good player, but I think that Quinyon was just a little bit more natural and a little bit more expansive in terms of how he was able to find the football and finish on it.
Just for the record, the Commanders at 36 taking Johnny Newton, who we just talked about, the penetrating defensive tackle from Illinois, matching your orange tie, Fran.
And then the Patriots after that taking your boy, Jalen Polk.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Interesting. My guy going early. Wow, good for them.
A bunch of receivers going off the board early because I know it started off. We had Keon Coleman go to Buffalo, and then Ladd McConkey go to the Chargers. So the receivers going off early.
Yeah, everybody turning their heads away from AD Mitchell.
Seriously,
and Troy Franklin. Let's talk about how things set up here in the second round, Fran. Let's start at offensive line. The perception that there was this like really great top of the class, especially on the outside at tackle, and there's a bit of a drop off after that. Who are some of the guys that you do like on day two? I guess at tackle to start with.
Sure, I think that there's a handful of guys that I think are going to be really interesting, and my guess is are going to come off the board within the next 15 picks or so. And I think that when you're looking at Roger Rosengarten from Washington, you can go into Patrick Paul from Houston, Kingsley Suamataia from BYU. I think there are a handful of players. Brandon Coleman from TCU, Kiran Amagaji from Yale. I don't know if he'll be round 2, but maybe we get into round 3. There are a bunch of really talented players still available at that position. I would say that it's kind of like what we talked about this when I came into the studio a couple weeks ago, was that the talent, the influx of talent is right there in the top 20. When you get to this point, it's all the same guys that you typically would see. These are all day 2 talents here. So some of them are going to have holes in their game, but a lot of reasons to be excited. But those are probably the names that first come to mind when I think of some of the tackles still available.
We saw last night the Eagles had their choice of any cornerback. They could very well have their choice of any linebacker tonight. Do you view these linebackers as second-round caliber players? Any of these guys?
I think that you certainly can make the case for Junior Colson from Michigan, just a really well-rounded player, and he doesn't have any huge holes in his game. The ball production and coverage wasn't great, but that's kind of down on the pecking order in terms of what you're really looking for at that position. I think this is a player that sees things really well. He's got NFL size. He's strong, can take on blocks and play through contact. His ability to defeat those blocks one-on-one was impressive for a guy that really hasn't been playing football all that long, but he's a fun player to be able to study. I think probably one of the more well-rounded linebackers in this group. You get into Peyton Wilson from NC State. To me, maybe the most gifted of these linebackers, but obviously the big thing with him is going to be that injury history and how much he gets dinged for that. The history of the shoulders, I think he had a knee going back to high school as well. So, I think you look at those two players. Edrin Cooper is a player that Yeah, right. Edrin Cooper as well from Texas A&M has also been a player that has gotten a lot of buzz. Really, really athletic and explosive and rangy. Doesn't play through contact as well as those other two guys that I mentioned, but he's a guy that's played a ton of special teams, and he's got that sideline to sideline range that a lot of people are looking for.
I want to ask you about the defensive line, because we know that the Eagles obviously value the defensive line, and if you're looking for somebody who can really contribute, the second round is a good place to find them. I'm looking at who's available on the edge and who's available at tackle, with a couple guys just having gone. Mike Hall Jr. from Ohio State, Chris Jenkins from Michigan, and then on the outside, my guy Jonah Ellis. Then you got Marshawn Nealand, and it seems like that's there's sort of a drop off after that. Maybe Adisa Isaac if you're a big Nittany Lion guy, but anybody there that sort of pops to you?
Yeah, to me, Jonah Ellis is a player that I really enjoyed studying on film. He's extremely active. He's not quite as skilled as Leatu Latu, who went in the top 15 to Indianapolis last night. But
he's got time.
It cut from a similar cloth. I think when you're looking at like the skill set, the motor is outstanding with Jonah Ellis. So he's a player that I enjoyed studying on film. Christian Braswell is another player that, he was getting some first-round love coming into the season. A former big-time recruit. He was a 5-star kid, a 4-star kid coming into Alabama. Just never really kind of like took that next step. Still, he finished his career with 2 starts to his name. So, this is a guy that I think you're hoping the arrow is pointing up, that he'd be a more productive pro player than he was a collegian, but the tools are absolutely there. Bo, we got to see him down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Eric Watts is another guy that I think when you get into like the third-round range, I think he's going to start getting some love. The kid from UConn, he's a kind of a DN, D-tackle hybrid, similar in ways to Darius Robinson, who went in the first round last night to Arizona. So if you're trying to find comparisons there,
that's
I know
kind of a prototype that I would imagine sort of appeals to the Eagles right now, because if you're looking for like, I love Jonah Ellis, but if you're talking about him or like an Austin Booker type, it's a little bit duplicative with Nolan Smith. Whereas if you get that guy who can be a little bit more like a Milton Williams, you're sort of filling 2 spots.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think everybody has to remember, is that when you get to really the entire draft, but certainly when you get into day 2 and you get into the middle rounds, it really is all about what you're looking for specifically at all of these different skill sets. And so, yes, you might have similar grades on Jalix Hunt, who's, what is he, 6'5", 240, versus an Eric Watts, who's in the 270 range. Well, they are completely different players, even though they might be listed as, as an edge, in all of our rankings with our favorite website. I think when you're looking at these guys as football players, they are very different in terms of what they bring to the table. And so with all of these positions, it's really going to come down to, what exactly you need for your team and for your scheme.
Just to update you quickly, Fran, the defensive tackle run continues. The Titans taking Tavondre Sweat, the big fella from Texas.
Wow. Well, there you go. So he was. I mean, obviously, look, the unfortunate the arrest a couple weeks ago kind of made people think he might go a little bit further. So he ends up in Tennessee. A little bit of a surprise there.
Your previous answer was a natural transition to a question I wanted to ask you. Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network said earlier today, most of the league agrees on the 40 to 50 top players in this class. After that, it becomes a flavor draft. From your perspective, where or what range is that drop off where it goes from, all right, these are like the clear top guys, to this is more of the eye of the beholder?
So I'm a tough person to ask that question to, Zach, only because I view that basically with like every part of the draft. Because to me, like I look at all these players and I say, okay, obviously I'm looking at it team and scheme agnostic, right? I'm always going to have an eye towards the Eagles, obviously, but the way I'm evaluating these guys is just projecting them forward to the NFL. And to me, there are only a couple guys at each position on a typical year average that are like scheme and position, like agnostic. Hey, you know what? Like this guy can fit anybody, no matter what. He'll go in and be awesome. But that's why we start having conversations. Oh, well, JC Latham, he might go a little bit earlier than you think. Those kind of conversations happen because, to me, I look at it and I say, yeah, like Joe Alt is a great fit for this team, but Fuanga would be a better fit for that team, right? And you start getting into those kind of conversations. I think there are so very few players that are truly, that kind of scheme versatile. And so I do think that certainly there's going to be a drop off, at every tier of the draft. But I think right now is like where we're looking at it and say, okay, like this comes down to what a team wants and needs, and then also the profile too. And that's why, I was having a conversation with some people in the space about the receivers that are going to come off the board here early in the round. And we were talking about the Buffalo Bills. And you say, all right, well, what are some of the guys that kind of fit them? And you could point to all of these players. You lose Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, you kind of like clean the slate and say, okay, they can go any type of way here. But when I look at Buffalo's draft history under Brandon Beane and since Sean McDermott has been there, you say, all right, well, you look at the players that they've selected in the first round, second round, third round. They've taken a lot of players that were more known for their play speed and not necessarily for the way they were athletic testers. And those guys typically fell to them, quote unquote. And it's like, okay, that's because they valued them a little bit more than everybody else. And so I was like, I don't know. I kind of feel like they might go Keon Coleman here, and lo and behold, it ended up being Keon Coleman to Buffalo,
flex.
and that's kind of how I view it, though. It's like, when you get into these tiers, it's those little tiny differentiators, those little tiny tiebreakers that can say, oh, this guy's the pick versus he is not. You can only pick one of these guys, and so to me, those tiers and those drop offs, they happen throughout the course of the entire draft, and it starts in the middle of round one every single year.
We didn't get a chance to ask you about the interior offensive linemen, Fran. Zach Frazier, Jackson Powers-Johnson, Cooper Beebe, Christian Haynes, a bunch of guys who the Eagles did bring in for visits. If you're looking for someone who can, compete at right guard right away, who pops there for you?
I would say because Zach Frazier's been a starter at center only at West Virginia, if memory serves, and I think when you look at Powers-Johnson, he had a little bit more flexibility in terms of how he was used at Oregon. He was a guard until this past season when he started at center. So I think that you look at JPJ, Jackson Powers-Johnson, you say, he probably has a little bit more guard flexibility there. Christian Haynes from UConn, a guard that I've been always high on going back to the fall when I first studied him. Really, really athletic and has some outstanding blocks on the move. One of my favorite players to watch in space in this draft. And so those would be a couple guys that come up to the top of my mind when I talk about guards.
Go ahead.
I'm good.
Well, you got nothing else to ask?
No. I have a lot. I thought we were at our time.
I think Fran said he could stay for a little bit longer.
I can hang out with you guys for a little bit.
Okay. What? Tell us first of all what people can watch from you on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. What do we got?
Yeah, so I would say like right now I'm doing articles every night in terms of covering each pick. So we had last night I was able to catch up with Charles Walls, the Eagles director of player personnel, caught up with him for a little bit, and just got some of his notes on Quinyon Mitchell and put some of my notes in there, some stats that stood out to me about Quinyon, and I'll kind of follow that template here over the next couple of days in terms of every single draft pick, catch up with somebody up in the draft room, and then come back and write off of that. So I'm going to do that here for the next couple of days, and then have a long film breakdown of the entire rookie class, hopefully to drop on the Eagles YouTube page in the middle of next week.
So the viewers can obviously check out that article, but can you kind of give a sense of how Charles Walls felt after that pick and what stood out to him about Quinyon Mitchell?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is, again, the kind of the total picture, right? And the entire body of work. That was something that Charles had mentioned was just, this is a player that every step along the way, you felt good about it. You loved what you saw from him at Toledo. And this is a guy that didn't back down from a challenge when they went up against Ohio State and Illinois but dominated the level of competition that he was at. And that's the thing is, I was talking with somebody in the office actually just a little bit ago. And it's like, how small, because they're not like a big college football fan. Toledo, do they put NFL players in? I'm like, well, I mean, the MAC has put some good players into the NFL in recent years. I mean, Khalil Mack was the third overall pick. Eric Fisher was the number one pick. Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger, Randy Moss came out of the MAC. I mean, there's some great players that come from that conference. So, I think when you look at Quinyon Mitchell, going back to what Charles was saying, the Senior Bowl was great to be able to just go down and say, seeing him against the level of competition and seeing him go up against those guys and dominate the way he did. I mean, Bo, you and I watched it. He was the best player on the field when he was out there. And so seeing him dominate in that way, does that made you feel better about the projection moving forward to the NFL?
I have the very specific memory I talked about last night of that the interception he made. I think it was in team drills, and then he sort of takes it all the way 100 yards back to the house, and just the speed that he showed and the competitive zeal, as Zach might say. It sort of was on display last night in the phone call with Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, and then even talking today. This is a guy who sort of comes across as meaning serious business.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those. This is a business to him, and he takes it very, very seriously. And you can see that just by the way that, honestly, you can see a lot of that through film. It may seem silly, but a lot of times you can see the guys that really take their stuff seriously when it comes to the way that they play, whether it's the high motor plays necessarily, or necessarily also the way they see things. And I think when you watch Quinyon, the way that he breaks on throws. There was a play that I'm hoping to be able to break down for that segment that I referenced. They were playing Bowling Green this past season, and it was a 1-point game, less than a minute left. It was 4th and 14, around middle of the field, and they called what we call a dagger concept, where you have a bunch of vertical routes inside, and you're running a deep in cut in the middle of the field. They're hoping to get the first down. It's 4th and 14. Quinyon read it the entire way, jumped the route, got the pass break up. He tried to make like a really acrobatic catch behind behind his body, and ended up falling incomplete. But ball's on the ground, game over. The team goes nuts, and again, that's kind of what you want your guys to be able to step up and make big plays when their number's called in a crunch time moment. To see Quinyon come through with that was a play that kind of stands out in terms of his ability to understand. Hey, this is what the offense is likely to call in this situation. They know what coverage we're in. What are they likely to call here? Once I see this route break, I know this is what the play is. And so often he was basically like beating receivers to the catch point. There was an interception he had in 2022 against Eastern Michigan on a quick hitch route where he read it so fast, where he was essentially standing there at the catch point. Like the ball hit him in the chest because he beat the ball there so quickly. And that's where that 4.3 speed shows up as well.
Well, we have some news here as Mike Garafolo has just broken. So the Rams traded up to take Braden Fiske, and now the Eagles have moved up. They are on the clock at 40. Can you stay with us, Fran, to find out who this is going to be for?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see who this is. I'm excited.
Right, so they're on the clock at 40. Now, there has been this huge run of defensive tackles. If they are trying to get involved in the defensive tackle run, Mike Hall and Chris Jenkins, both still on the board. If it's a wide receiver, Troy Franklin and A.D. Mitchell are available. Roman Wilson as well. If it's the running back, Jonathan Brooks, basically pick your running back. They could do what they did at corner. They can do the same thing at linebacker, and I think that would be really interesting if they're moving up here for Junior Colson or Edgerrin Cooper or somebody else. If it's an edge, we talked about it already. Jonah Ellis is a possibility. Marshawn Nealand, all of the offensive linemen are still available, and Zach talked about it. It could be for Cooper DeJean. You think they could play together, Fran? Would there be a spot for Cooper DeJean on this team?
Well, and that's the thing with Cooper DeJean is that sometimes he has been viewed differently by some people. Some viewed him as a slot corner or as a safety moving forward in the NFL. And so depending on how you view him, you might be able to say, those guys can play together at the same time. And so he's a player, Zach, kind of what we were referencing earlier. It just comes down to what you need for your particular roster and for your scheme that you're deploying.
It's going to be DeJean. I'm not reporting that's out there from Jordan Schultz, from Jonathan Jones. That the Eagles are going to go with Cooper DeJean. So we'll see what the pick is in.
Wow.
Here we go.
It is Cooper DeJean. Zach, nice job. I know you didn't break this one, but you called it at the start of the round. You said if they're going to move up, it's going to be for Cooper DeJean. To me, that requires Zach.
Stop. Please stop.
This is even more impressive. The night of Zach, the weekend of Zach continues. Wow, this is the echo.
The Eagles are taking Cooper DeJean.
The echo of Lito Shepherd, Sheldon Brown, Michael Lewis. They're going Cooper DeJean. What do you make of it, Fran?
Yeah, I mean, Cooper DeJean was one of my favorite players to watch on film, guys. He was right there, with Quinyon Mitchell for me. And what I love about Cooper DeJean is that there are a lot of ways that he can find NFL success. And I do think that he can play corner in the NFL, but I also think he can be a really successful inside player as well. And so I'm interested to hear from Howie Roseman and from the coaching staff and see how they're viewed. But I think when you look at Cooper DeJean, one of the best run defenders, certainly in terms of his ability to come downhill and play extremely competitive, really instinctive, really outstanding ball skills. And again, that's kind of a lot of the things we talked about with Quinyon. I think you mentioned here with DeJean, his ability to make plays on the football, playing in man, playing in zone. They were obviously a heavy zone defense, but the other big thing with him is that he's a big play to happen whenever the ball is in his hands. So a lot to be excited about, certainly with Cooper DeJean.
This is very, very interesting. What do you think, Zach?
So I For full disclosure, I sent a text earlier today to Bo and Les, and I say I'd be aggressive trying to get DeJean and have a second building block in the secondary. My view on this is a few things here. I said this at the top of the show. Focus on the value, not on the position. If Cooper DeJean, if part of the appeal to him is the versatility, the fact that he can play corner, slot, and safety, the fact that he can help you in the return game, then he should have value for you right away. But also, the Eagles have a long-term need at cornerback. I mentioned this organization takes great pride in the 2002 draft when they took Lito Shepherd, Sheldon Brown, and Michael Lewis, when Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown did not have starting spots. And then a few years later, they're in the Super Bowl, and who's starting for them? Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown, okay? Because you go with value, you look ahead. If Cooper DeJean is the player that I think he is, that many people evaluating the draft think he is, then to get him at the number 40 overall pick makes a lot of sense to me. It doesn't matter that you took a corner yesterday because he's a versatile player who's going to help you. And if you have good football players, that's how you win. What you're trying to find is a pathway to blue chip players. And if Cooper DeJean can be a blue chip player, then that makes all the sense to me.
And just to clean this up, the trade up is 50 and 53 plus one of their 3 fifth-round picks in exchange for 40, where they took DeJean, and a mid-third-round pick, number 78. So what they have done is they have taken their 2 seconds, jumped up about 10, 11 spots, and then free-falled back from 53 to 78 and given up one of 3 fifth-round picks. And the fifth-round pick, there's a good chance they're going to be recouping that value at some point over the course of draft weekend. So it's an interesting gambit. I would imagine that this means that, DeJean was someone who had a borderline first-round grade on their board, and it sort of stood out for them.
Yeah, typically you would hear that when any general manager is going to make a trade like that at the top of the second round, it's typically because, hey, this guy held a high grade for us. And so that would be my expectation as well.
I guess the only other thing to talk about is the concern that we had over the course of the last month or so. I mean, there has not been a team in the NFL that made the Super Bowl with 2 white players in their starting secondary. So does this mean the end of the line for Reed Blankenship?
That is ridiculous. Come on, stop.
That sounds like a conversation for another day for you.
Fran, thank you so much. You've got work to do. I feel like this is a happy time for you. 2 of your favorite guys in the class.
Yeah, so it's 2 guys that I thought were top 20 players in the class. So very, very exciting, certainly. And look, this is a defense that is getting younger. It's going to be fun to see how it all shakes out.
Follow Fran on Twitter at EaglesXOs and check out all he's got coming on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Thank you, Fran.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Looking sharp.
Thank you, Fran.
We all silly like the mayor.